You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hi, my name is Richard Harrison, and you're listening to, or possibly watching, the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Before we get started, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, the podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is a former cricket umpire who decided to write a memoir recounting his umpiring career, from umpiring league cricket matches in Kent, England, to umpiring Premier Cricket in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, where he umpired some of the best female cricketers in the world. He is an author and has written some other books, which are The Export Gardener and First Tuesday Any Price a Winner. He is currently working on a new book, which is called Positively Pazzo, Learning Italian Late in Life. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Richard Harrison. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jack.
It's great to have you here, Richard, and it's going to be a great chat. And hope everyone will enjoy it and learn a lot about Richard and his book, as we will talk about in this discussion, and just have some fun. And that's what it's all about, hey? Playing cricket, it's all about having fun, and we're going to have some fun here today.
Terrific.
So, Richard, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I like to take them back to when they first got into cricket. And it's very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they got started in cricket. So, Richard, let's go back to the very beginning. Growing up in Australia, what are your memories of playing cricket? And who was some of your cricketing idols that you looked up to growing up?
I reckon I probably started playing cricket at school when I was about 10 years old. And once I got to about the age of about 14 or so, I was able to use my father's, what they used to call a ladies' ticket, to get into the MCG members. And I used to go there after school and certainly through the school holidays and see, people like Dennis Lilly and the Chappell brothers and Rod Marsh. And I used to hunt around in front of the dressing rooms and pester players from every nation in the world for autographs. And I was just having the time of my life. Absolutely loved it. And that's where it all started. Been a huge cricket fan since, played while I was at school and for a few years afterwards. Had a back injury that sort of curtailed things for quite some time. Would have probably played on a bit longer but for that. But have always just had a tremendous love of the game. But it started when I was a kid, and I used to idolise the great players of that era back in the day, probably before your time, but you can read about it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, that's great. It's a wonderful game, isn't it, cricket, where it just captures you and it just drags you in and you never want to leave it, isn't it? You just it's a hard thing to describe, really, isn't it?
Oh, look, it's a game like no other. I think I even mentioned in my book, I mean, there's no game that's got anything like the sort of history, complexity, and traditions that cricket has. It's unique in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone that stood out to you, any cricketing idols that you admired as a kid growing up, or was it a lot of players that you looked up to?
Oh, look, any number, but I suppose, I mean, going to the MCG and seeing Dennis Lilly tearing in from the southern stand end, and the theatre of him making a desperate, raucous appeal for a caught behind or LBW against England or against the West Indies, and the whole crowd erupting as a consequence, as he would plant both feet in the middle of the pitch and arms outstretched, make this desperate plea towards the umpire, and everyone's on their edge of their seats just waiting for the decision. It was wonderful theatre. And when you're 14, 15 years old, I mean, it's just colossal. It's wonderful stuff.
Yes, it is. And obviously before my time, Dennis Lilly, but it
Oh,
must have
well,
been
you
great to
missed
see the
out.
great man in action, really,
You
wasn't it?
missed out. It was great. It was great theatre. Whether or not he knew that at
Mm.
the time, and whether or not a lot of the histrionics, for want of a better word, were all sort of part of that, I don't know. Maybe it was all just entirely spontaneous, but he would effectively conduct the crowd making an appeal, and it was just magic.
Wiping the sweat off his brow as he
Oh,
usually did.
all that, yeah, it was all, but the whole running action, the arms
Mm.
pumping, it, oh, man, it was just captivating.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were some very great bowlers of that era as well. Jeff Thompson and the West
Oh,
Indian
indeed.
Four Horsemen. It
Indeed.
was such a
Yeah.
wonderful era to be a part of cricket, wasn't it? Just growing
Oh, it
up
was,
or even playing the game.
yeah, it was tremendous. It was tremendous.
Absolutely. So then you got back into playing cricket. When you went to live in England, you umpired cricket, of course, and we'll talk about that later on.
Uh-huh.
But you had the opportunity to play cricket again after a 20-year hiatus or something like that
That's it.
for
That's it.
the
Yeah.
Shivam Cricket Club. And you dedicated a chapter to the club in the book. And you spoke
Yes.
very passionately about the club and about playing cricket again and for them. So what was it like playing cricket again after a long break from not playing the game from your early days? And why does the Shivam Cricket Club hold a special place in your heart? And tell us a bit more about the club for those who don't know or who haven't read the book yet.
Well, it came about because I'd umpired a season of village and school and some sort of social cricket in Kent, where I happened to be living at the time. And got to know a few guys from a few clubs, and actually got invited by Shiban and one or two other clubs to see if I want to play with them. And as it worked out, I was able to umpire on Saturdays, but I would play Sunday village friendlies with Shiban, which was only about 10, 15-minute drive from my place. And the ground itself was on a huge private estate, and it was quite difficult to find just outside the actual village of Shiban, which in itself is only tiny. But it was just the most beautiful ground. It was surrounded by willow trees that every few years Grey Nichols would harvest, one or two, to make particular cricket bats. They'll literally be branded Fairlawn Willow, which was the name of the estate that the ground was on. There was a lovely little stream that ran along one side of the ground, a gorgeous little pavilion, wonderful little scoreboard. It was, and you were off the road, you couldn't see anything else. It was just like this wonderful little oasis. Wonderful atmosphere, gorgeous, beautiful cricket ground. The whole nature of it was just so wonderful and so friendly. It was just tremendous. Such a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Any moments you remember from your playing time for Shivam? There's quite a few that you mentioned in the book, which are quite funny. For those who have read it, you would understand. But for those who haven't read it, they're quite funny stories. So any memories that stand out for you, Richard?
I remember one that springs to mind immediately. We were playing, it was sort of our local derby. We were playing a team called Plaxtol, and Plaxtol, they had a ground over the other side of the Fairlawn estate. So this was the local sort of derby, albeit only a Sunday friendly. And there was a fellow in the Plaxtol team that I knew from umpiring some social games on Friday nights in Sevenoaks where I lived. And his son was also playing in this same team, and we were batting first. I was slotted in to bat at number 3, and I sat there outside the pavilion while our two opening batsmen put on an opening partnership of 178 before one of them was decent enough to get out. So I finally got out there. I took my guard and I looked around and I faced up. And who should be bowling but this fellow I know, his 14-year-old son, who, with the score on 178 for 1, putting it in the English conscience, managed to clean bowl me first ball. So then I made a very long and disconsolate exit all the way back to the pavilion, having been clean bowled by a 14-year-old. And then I remember a few overs later, I thought, well, I've got to, make myself useful. So I wandered out and just did a stint of umpiring, because, of course, at that level, we all just umpired ourselves. And I can remember standing behind the stumps at the bowlers end, just as this kid's father walked past, this great sort of cheeky smile creasing his lips. And I just said, I remember saying, right, well, you can shut up for a start. And he burst out laughing. But three generations would play in teams on a Sunday. You'd have some kid out there and he's directing his grandfather to field that backward point or whatever. And you would always have a really lovely tea mid-afternoon. You would always go to the pub and have a couple of beers afterwards. Games were played in the most wonderful, friendly spirit. It was just people. There was laughter. There was friendship. It was just wonderful. Beautiful surrounds, gorgeous cricket ground. A few dodgy pitches. They weren't always the greatest, but the atmosphere and the nature of it, of village cricket in England, it was just wonderful. If anyone ever gets a chance to play, umpire, or be involved in village matches in England, ever, you should take it with both hands. It's a unique experience. It's a wonderful part of the culture and the nature and the fabric of the game. Mightn't be the greatest standard, but there's nothing like it. Wonderful.
Absolutely. As you said, picturesque grounds. You see those photos in England of players playing cricket and the hills in the background, the scoreboard. You mentioned that in your book about how I would go to a new ground if I've never been there before and just explore the ground. And I laughed when you said in the book, waxing lyrical about the boundary markers was a little bit too much.
But we did. We'd go somewhere different every week, and every week they were all these grounds were different, but there was always any number of things about each one that were just wonderful. It might be the ramshackle little pavilion, or the benches that were set up around the ground. We played at a ground called Falconhurst. That was a regular fixture for Shibboleth on a Sunday. And it was always someone's job to keep an eye on the cattle that also grazed where the cars were parked, because cattle would break off side mirrors off cars and bite off aerials and things. So that was someone's job to keep an eye on that, to sort of shoo them away. Yeah. And the cricket ground was set in the grounds in front of an enormous manor house. They're a National Trust property, magnificent place. And apparently, I was speaking to one of the Falconhurst players there one day, and he was explaining that the cricket club leased the ground and the pavilion and all the facilities from the people who owned this enormous property. And they had a 99-year lease with a 99-year option, and enshrined in the fabric of that lease document was an annual rental. And the rental for all of that, including the upkeep of the pitch and the outfield and all the rest of it, the annual rental was a case of claret. Now, I can't imagine you'll find anywhere in the world where such an arrangement might exist for a sporting team to play on the weekends and enjoy those wonderful facilities in return for a dozen bottles of wine over the course of 99 years. That just sums up what much of village cricket in England is. I mean, it's quite a unique phenomenon.
Yes. Just a question: is that lease still going? It's 99 years.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Oh yeah. No, regular fixture for the Shib and Rams. I still keep in touch with a few guys from over there. So, Falconhurst's always on the schedule. Although, interestingly, we had a fellow who played with us, probably still does, I dare say. He was our fixture secretary. And if ever an opportunity opened up for a new game throughout the season, his criteria was that the players from the club that we would play drank afterwards at a pub that had a particular beer on tap, his favourite beer. So he would always ask them, so that's fine, yeah, we've got a date that's opened up there. And he said, now, where do you guys go for a beer after the game? And they'd say, oh, the such and such, the, Pig and Whistle, or the King's Head or something. And he'd say, now, have they got Harvey's on tap? And if they said no, Harvey's Sussex Bitter was his favourite beer. He said, no, can't help you. If they had Harvey's Sussex Bitter on tap, he'd schedule them in. But if they did said, if you didn't drink Harvey's after the game, no. Didn't happen.
Forget it.
That was the selection criteria. Nothing to do with the state of the pitch or the standard or anything like that. It's where you go, what beer you drink after the game. Again, it's just these wonderful little eccentricities.
Yeah, fantastic.
Exist in that part of the world.
In the book as well, Richard, you talked about how you had to get your kit because you didn't have any kit, and you talked about getting the bats being made at this company where you were living at the time, and just going in there, getting your bats, seeing the bats being made by the craftsmen, and knocking it with the mallets and all that. Tell us about that. You still got one of those bats from that time, haven't you?
Absolutely. So it sits behind my desk. Doesn't get a lot of use these days, but there was a sports shop just sort of down the hill from the flat where I lived, and when I was going to play again, I remember going down there one day and picked up any number of bats and just sort of waved them around in the shop. And in all honesty, there was one brand, one make of bat that was just different. Every time I picked up a Salix bat, which was made by a local company in Kent. Salix, I've since learned, is Latin for willow. They felt better balanced. They just felt right. There was something about them.
Yeah.
And I went to the factory or the workshop one Saturday morning and said, look, I want to, be interested in the bat, because I only had 3 or 4 probably in the shop. So I started chatting to a fellow called Andrew Kember, who owned the business. Now, he was apprenticed to a very famous bat maker, a guy called John Newbury in Sussex, and actually told him at this stage, look, I'm writing a book about umpiring and playing cricket in Kent. And I said, look, I remember, I think I've written this, that picking up one of your bats was like being upgraded to business class. And I think that probably did it. Next thing you know, I'm out the back of the workshop, and I'm standing in front of this wall with all these, as they call them, clefts of willow. Yeah. These are great, they're sort of bats they've just got the crude bit of willow with bat handles inserted. And he would take a few out and he'd hit them with this wooden mallet and he'd put them back and vice. Eventually, through this process, he narrowed it down to about 3. And then he gave it to me and he said, pick that up. How does that feel? And eventually we narrowed it down to 1, and he literally went from there, shaving off elements of the timber and basically shaping and preparing and creating this bat with me kind of test driving it at each stage. And he would literally file the handle into a shape that was more comfortable for me to hold. And it was an absolute bespoke masterpiece. I was incredibly lucky. And this probably took a couple of hours. But he devoted all that time to make this bat for me on a Saturday morning. And when it came time to pay for it, and I bought some pads and some gloves and a few other bits and pieces, and the girl working the cash register, she just shook her head, said, nobody gets a bat made for them like that. So I don't know how the hell you manage that. It was just right place, right time, just managed to strike a rapport. But it was fascinating to see it, to see the way he went about it, the precision and the concentration. It was almost meditative. But it was, the skill, wonderful, extraordinary. But, it was a hell of a bat. Oh, gee whiz. People
must have scored a few runs with it, I suppose.
Well, I did. A few others probably scored more with it than I did. But, it was great. It was a very, very nice bat. I was very lucky.
It goes sort of unnoticed in the game, doesn't it? How bats are made and how cricket balls are made. It's an art. It's an art form, isn't it? Just
it is.
Seeing them just carve the wood and prepare all that. It's wonderful to watch, isn't it? It's quite fascinating.
There's a cricket ball manufacturer based in Kent as well called Readers, That went on a tour there one day. That was interesting. But gee, to go to the Salix workshop and have that fellow literally craft that bat while I'm standing there and literally, just for me, and sort of testing the feel and the weight and the balance of it at each stage was really something quite special.
Yeah, absolutely. When you reflect at your time at Shivam, what are your best memories of the club and the players and the friends you've made? Because you must have made a lot of friends and made new friends as well in that
absolutely.
time.
Oh, absolutely. It's the friendships you make. The laughter that happens out on the field. I mean, our games were Sunday friendly, so nothing really mattered. I made some wonderful friends with some wonderful characters, and amongst some of the opposition players as well. Look, it was nice to win a game. It was nice to get a few runs, take a catch, take a few wickets and the like. But it was the friendships that resulted from all of that. It was the vehicle to establish those things, which is really quite unique and wonderful. Very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what cricket's about, isn't it? Mateships, camaraderie-ship when you're playing a team. And
absolutely. It's
and
such look, I hadn't played for 20 years, so it was. I rediscovered my great love of the game, both through umpiring and particularly playing there. And I thought all that had been lost to me. I had no desire, no intention to ever get involved again, and it all just happened by sort of chance and circumstance. It was just right place, right time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such. It was great to hear about that and about playing in England and your experiences there. Obviously, what's different about playing cricket in England to Australia? What are the differences when you play village cricket or league cricket compared to Premier cricket or cricket in Australia? Full stop, because they are different cultures and different ways of thinking about the game or playing it, and how the game is presented.
I think much of the attitude and atmosphere that accompanies cricket in England stems from the beautiful cricket grounds and pavilions that host the games. I lived in a town called Sevenoaks. The cricket club in Sevenoaks was formed, I think it was 1731. So, 40 odd years before Cook even landed on the east coast of Australia, that cricket club existed on that ground with probably much of that pavilion all that time before. It's got a wonderful history, and I think much of it said beautiful cricket grounds, village grounds, league grounds, county grounds. They're all cricket grounds. In Australia, certainly throughout Melbourne, they're cricket grounds that are football grounds in the winter. And there are very few, with the possible exception of the Albert Ground in St Kilda Road in Melbourne. I can't think of another cricket ground that comes close to pretty much any, in terms of the aesthetic, in terms of any of the grounds that I played and umpired in England. I think a lot of it stems from that. But in England, there's an inherent respect for the game's history and traditions. I'm not sure that we've got that here. In fact, we don't. That's first and foremost in England. It's just ingrained in the fabric of the game. Yeah. Its history, its traditions, and respect for the spirit of the game. Sadly, here in this country, it's all about winning. That's all that really matters.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously.
Well, that's my take on it. That was what it was a bit of a shock when I came back and started umpiring in Melbourne, having umpired for 6 or 7 years or so in England. It's a different animal in this country.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a culture shock, wasn't it? Just,
Oh, it was.
just a different contrast between the two countries.
Oh, it
Wasn't
was. Yeah, it's nowhere near as much fun. I sent an email to the then umpiring manager at Cricket Victoria at the end of that first season.
Oh.
And I said, look, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to umpire, Premier cricket here in Victoria. But to be honest, I haven't enjoyed it to anything like the degree that I did in England. But I said that the exception for me had been a couple of women's matches that I'd done. And I said, look, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to stay on the panel, but umpire women's matches exclusively. And I fully expected an email in response, the likes of, listen, son, you go where we send you, or you don't go anywhere at all. But as it turned out, he said, yeah, that's fine. We can do that. And for 10 years or so, I was the only umpire on the Cricket Victoria panel that umpired women's matches exclusively. Why, I don't know, because I think it was a wonderful time. But anyway, that's how it happened. That's how it fell.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to discuss about your umpiring journey a little bit later in this discussion. You've just touched on a little bit of that, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So, Richard, let's talk about why you wrote your book, Stumped, which is a cricket memoir about your umpiring experiences in England and Australia. And it's a very good book. I suggest to everyone to read it or listen to it. Very funny, very well narrated by Richard. You'll have a laugh, and you'll learn a lot about cricket and about cricket in Australia and in England. So why did you want to write the book, Richard? Was it just a personal, physical record for yourself, or you wanted to share that with other people about your umpiring experiences and your love of cricket? Because was it for those reasons, or you just wanted to write a book for the sake of it, or something?
I'd written two books already, one novel and one memoir of the years I spent living and working in England. And it was a friend of mine who suggested, why don't you write a book about your cricket umpiring? And at first I thought, I wouldn't have enough material. But she said, no, look, it'll be great, because I'd probably bored her rigid with various stories and anecdotes about it all. And she said, no, look, it'll be terrific. And I thought, oh, look, I'm not sure anyone would be all that interested. But once I got into it, I absolutely loved it. In fact, once I'd more or less finished it, or at least that first draft, it was all I could do not to delete the entire thing and just start all over again. So I didn't have any particular ambition from a commercial perspective with it. I didn't expect, I wasn't writing it to try and, create a bestseller or some, tremendous commercial success. I did it because I think it was a celebration of the journey, of the time that I spent in England and in Australia. And I think it was also a great tribute to the game from my own perspective. Tribute to umpiring, tribute to umpiring women's cricket, and there were elements of playing again. I was very lucky in that I was a unique opportunity and a unique circumstance. And if nothing else, it's a unique story. Whether people share in that or relish that themselves, that's up to them. But it was a wonderful time doing it all, and it was wonderful, great fun to recall it all and present it all. And it's terrific when people read it or listen to the audiobook and enjoy it.
Yeah, I certainly enjoyed it. I listened to it twice, actually. The first time for pleasure and the second time in preparation for this discussion with you today. And it was a very wonderful written book, well audioed, narrated, I should say, by you, of course. I suggest to everyone to go and buy it or download it, because it's a great story about your umpiring experience.
That's very kind of you. That's what it looks like. That's the paperback for what it's worth. That's my hat, by the way. The rest of it, the cover design was done by a fellow in New Zealand, but I took the photo with the hat and they sort of took it from there. So
that's a nice touch. And I liked it how you called stumped, just using that cricket terminology. And
just one of those things that just kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
Look, it's look, it was great fun. I'd love to do it all over again.
Absolutely. Probably write another book.
Well, I'm writing this book about learning Italian at the moment, but I'd like to be able to I'd love to go to India and write about cricket over there. I mean, I've thought perhaps of, if an opportunity presents itself, of collaborating with a player, perhaps, one of the Australia's women players or something, perhaps. So, we'll see what happens. I've made some good friends amongst a lot of the girls that I umpired with over the years. So, we'll see how that falls. But if an opportunity presents itself, you never know, we might go around again.
Yeah, that's right. I also wanted to touch on that as well. Becoming an author. You've written some other books, as we mentioned in the intro, and you mentioned just before, your latest book, Learning Italian Late in Life. What drew you into becoming an author? What made you want to be an author? And just explain to us what's the process of writing a book like you have, these books that you've written. What's the process that goes into, first of all, writing those books, and what really drew you in as wanting to become an author?
Well, I've always enjoyed writing. I've loved writing. To be honest, I never really thought I could write something that was good enough or worthwhile enough that anyone would actually want to buy. But then I just had an idea for a novel. It was a murder mystery set against the backdrop of the Melbourne Cup, and I'm a big horse racing fan. And look, I just made a start, and next thing you know, I immersed myself in it. I would get up in the morning and start writing after a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock, and I'd look at the clock when I'd run out of steam, and it'd be 4:15. It's something once I immerse myself into, I just get lost in, and it's just such great fun. I love the process of creating the story and of presenting the story, much more so than seeing the finished product. That's great when it's out there and you publish it and you get a review or someone contacts you saying they enjoyed it. That's terrific. But for me, the joy of it is in the creation of the story. I just love putting the words down on the page. I just type on a computer as I go. I don't have really any sort of process in terms of how I structure it or how I go about it. It's just something that comes to me, and I just do it because I love it.
Yeah, that's right. Any advice for anyone who wants to become an author? What advice would you give them if they want to start writing their own book?
Oh, look, for me, I write about things that I know and that I love and that I enjoy. I don't know that I'll write another novel. Writing fiction's hard. Writing a memoir of something that you've done, that you've enjoyed, that you really enjoy recalling, easy and such good fun. If you want to write a book, write about something that you know, write about something that you love, and that's something that you enjoy writing about and presenting. And it's not work, it's a joy. But I think you write about what you know, write about what you love, and find that happy. You've got to find that point where you're really enjoying it. If you enjoy it, it's the best fun you can have.
Yeah, sort of like treated like a hobby in a way, sort of thing, is it?
Oh, look, or it's more of a passion, I think. I mean, if you've got it's a hobby, but for me, it's a passion. I just absolutely love it. I just love putting that story. I figure if I can make myself laugh, I'm half a chance to get them over the line with someone else.
Yeah,
not always, but I love reading books by people like Clive James was a hero of mine. Bill Bryson is another. People who write memoirs and who just write in a very simple, easy to read style, that's what I've tried to sort of replicate in what I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
do
not
you have any
literary
favorite
works.
Yeah, that's true. Do you have any favorite cricket books that you've read from authors or that you?
Gee, there's a good question. In all honesty, nothing that comes to mind. I've read a few cricket books that sadly I think have been a bit dry. In all honesty, I can't think of a particular cricket book that I really enjoyed reading. But my favourite book of all time is a book by Clive James. It's called Unreliable Memoirs. And it is a memoir of him growing up with his mother in England while his father was away in the Second World War. And it's just a magic book. Wonderful. Beautiful, simple language. He paints such a colourful picture. It's a glorious book. But I think there's a skill in that. People think, it's such simple language. There's no elaborate sort of similes and adjectives and prose and here. But I think that's the skill that I strive to try and replicate, is to paint a colourful, vivid picture using very simple language.
Yeah.
Which a lot of cricket books tend to get into those terribly sort of serious recollection of statistics and God knows what. Just lose me.
Well, cricket is a game based on statistics. And
sure.
That's how we base it off in cricket. But you ever met some of your favourite authors? You ever contacted them for advice, or
no?
You ever met them at a signing for their book, or
no? For a short time there in England, I lived in a village in Norfolk called Wyndham, which apparently was where Bill Bryson lived at the time, and I was hoping I was going to bump into him at the shops one day, but never did. So look, they'd be the two. Bill Bryson, Clive James. No, never have. And sadly, of course, Clive James died a couple of years ago, which was a great loss. So no, never have. Wish I had, but not so far.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to hear about your process of writing the book and why you wanted to write it, and becoming an author and how you go about that. It's very interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Obviously, for those who wanted to get a copy of your books or anything like that, where can people find your books, and where can people access them or stuff like that?
They're available, at all the usual suspects online. And look, they are available in bookshops. At least the paperback version is available in bookshops. A bookshop may not stock it, but if you went in and asked for it, they could certainly order it. I have a distributor that can supply it to various bookshops. And it's the paperback versions on, Amazon and Booktopia and all the Waterstones in the UK and all the usual online outlets, and so too the audio book, Apple, Google, etc., Storytel, here, there, and everywhere. I don't look after it. I just give it all to distributors. They deal with all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's just too hard. Let someone else deal with that.
It's widely available, and if you're looking at it, you shouldn't have to look too hard to find it if you want it.
That was another question I was going to ask you. Dealing with publishers and all that stuff, is that a difficult process, dealing with the publishers? Or
I published it myself. I dealt with agents and publishers the first time around. It was a tedious, drawn out process, and I enjoy publishing it more so myself. I've got more control. I have more fun. I'm more involved. This book and everything I do from here on in, I'll just publish myself.
Yeah, much easier.
Well, it is, and it's much more. It's viable in this day and age.
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, with the advent of the whole Kindle ebook platform, it just opened that opportunity up. And it is more viable in this day and age than ever for someone to publish their own book. Doesn't mean you can cut corners, and you've still got to.
Yeah.
It's got to look, appear, and be every bit as professional as a commercially published book is. But you've got to make sure you use the right formatters, the right proofreaders, the right cover designers, and you've got to. The biggest thing for me is putting that whole sort of marketing process in place. That's still a learning curve, but it's a journey, and it's fascinating. It's exciting. It's fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do what you're passionate in life.
Well,
and have fun with
it. Well,
it.
That's just it. I mean, they're not just books to me. They're really sort of very much part of me. And I've loved the creation of it, and you put them out there into the world, and it's exciting.
Absolutely. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed part 1 of our cricket discussion with Richard Harrison. I hope you enjoyed listening to Richard talk about his cricketing journey and why he wrote his book Stumped. Stay tuned for part 2 of our cricket discussion with Richard Harrison.